Again, if you read the title, you all know what's coming. Of course, you have to show up.
Every time you do a Stranger Things review, of course I'd show up.
You do know I am downplaying your menacingness just for this one joke, just so I don't have to use you that much in this review, right?
Yeah.
I really despise you right now.
Hey now, don't make me do another creepy entrance again.
You know what? Try me. I bet I've gotten used to it by now. Oh god, you're like the Mickey Mouse equivalent of that Steamboat Willie horror movie that I made earlier.
I guess so.
Wait, didn't I get rid of you? I thought I flicked some Mickey Mouse pants at you.
Really? I thought that was the editor.
Let's just get on with this recap. Hey guys, it's Daniel here, and yes, you've read the title correctly, we are doing a little revisit of Stranger Things. Now you might be wondering, wait a minute Daniel, you already reviewed each season of Stranger Things, didn't you? Well, this ought to explain it. Exactly. This is me rewatching this show and me giving my updated thoughts and opinions on each season in celebration of this baby coming out. Yep, there's the new poster. The 4th season is up there, so I had to make an arrangement. In preparation for this final season coming out, I rearranged some of the posters. But now, I thought that in celebration of this final season, I'd go back and rewatch one of the greatest shows I've seen in my entire life, Stranger Things. So now, we're going back to revisit seasons 1 to 4, and me just having my quick updated thoughts on each season. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy my look back and revisit of Stranger Things. To start off my revisit, let's talk about my updated thoughts on the very first season of Stranger Things. Now, again, I've done reviews of each season already, so you can check out my details of what I think of it then. But, you know, just for anybody that hasn't seen my reviews, I'll go through the story of the season real quick. The story's about a group of kids named Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and a girl with telekinesis powers that they call 11, going on a mission and adventure to look for one of their friends, Will Byers, who has been taken to this mysterious dimension known as the Upside Down. While Will's family, including his mother Joyce and brother Jonathan, Mike's sister Nancy, and the chief of Hawkins Police, Jim Hopper, go on their adventures to also find the lost boy. So, going back to look at this season again, what do I think of this season after some rewatch? I gotta say, I still had a blast with this first season. I think it has a lot of the same traits that I remember loving from the first time I see it, but also look at some new things that's either a problem or an improvement over the last few years. I will say the first 3 episodes I liked, but didn't get into too much into it because I guess it had a few similar traits to like the characters getting bullied, the girl going after the hot guy, and arguments between the kids and the parents that did kind of seem like, you know, familiar traits from a lot of other stories, but, you know, this show is definitely the king of having something called intertextuality, which I learned recently and has some familiar traits to other projects, but they always add a good twist to it to make it come off as unique to the audience. Like, for example, this first season is kind of like an E.T. inspired story, with these group of kids hiding a wanted fugitive in their basement. But whereas E.T. was an alien, this season it has a little girl with telekinesis powers. So that's kind of a nice little twist to the story. But as soon as episode 4 hits, and we get to the rest of that season from there, that's when the show started to become much more endearing. It had a lot more peril. I love the bond and connections between all the characters. I love the blooming romance between Mike and Eleven. I love the working and banter between Jim Hopper and Joyce Byers. I felt Joyce's determination throughout the season, trying to prove that Will is not dead and he's still alive and he's still in this mysterious upside down place. And I think that Nancy and Jonathan's relationship really blossomed, and even though you can tell that Steve Harrington was a bit of a jerk in season 1, looking back and knowing what his future lies, besides bullying Jonathan, he wasn't exactly the worst human being to look around. I think that kind of trophy goes to the two friends that he was hanging out with, who, in my opinion, were just the poor influences for Steve to hang out with. So that's why he kind of split from them and tried to redeem himself, and it blossomed into a great character from there. I will say that this video is going to contain spoilers for Stranger Things, so if you haven't seen the show, don't watch it. I love that in the first season, they grew a bond between Nancy and Jonathan, but they don't end up together right away, and instead, Steve is still with Nancy at the end, and then we carry on that storyline into season 2. I love the atmosphere of Hawkins. It has a lot of creepiness, and again, I love the mix of horror and coming of age story of these group of kids coming together to fight off a horror threat. I think that that is a great story to have. I will say that there are a few instances where this season can get a little bit too underwhelming with a few of the bullying elements. I'm not a big fan of Mike's mother, Karen Wheeler, because she kind of comes across like a bit of a uptight mum, especially when she's getting into the business of Nancy's bond with Steve, and her saying it's a very big deal when really it isn't, which definitely just puts salt in the wound when Barb goes missing, Nancy's friend, and Nancy calls her mother out on not paying too much attention to that and more focusing on getting into Nancy's business with whatever relationship she has, which made Karen come across as a annoying mother throughout this season. And I also, looking back, this is something that I did go back and forth on, because when I first watched the show, I had this problem. When I watched the show again, I didn't really have too much of a problem. And here, it's still a problem, but it's understandable, is kind of how naggy and kind of whiny and stern Lucas was this season. I mean, I understand his problem, like he's after Will, and this mysterious telekinesis girl is like interfering. I get that, but he was just a bit too obnoxious about that, a bit too rude and mean towards Eleven, especially considering that Eleven doesn't have too much experience with a lot of the outside world. And speaking of which, Eleven is also an amazing lead character. She comes across as nervous, she comes across as shy, but when she interacts with Mike and interacts with like people's like greatest achievements and things that the world of Hawkins adapts to, she then like gets excited and feels a good sense of fun, especially when she gets into Mike's dad's recliner chair, and just like the bond between the two is just so cute to watch, which then leads to the emotional moment at the end when Elle sacrifices herself. And Jim Hopper is also an amazing character as well. I felt his backstory, and despite the fact that he can be a little bit of a rude towards some people, it doesn't make him unlikable, especially when we find out his backstory. Overall, this season I thought was a great first setup for the rest of the show, and it has a great final 2 episodes with everybody coming together, which just gave me a buzz of like, ooh, I love seeing everybody together. So, this first season I will give a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's a great heck of a season, and it's a great start for this show. Then we have Season 2. In Season 2, Will is safe in Hawkins after what happened in Season 1, But a mysterious shadow figure, known as the Mind Flayer from the Upside Down, starts to take control of Will's body. So his friends, his mum and his family are trying to help him through this and trying to figure out how to stop the Mind Flayer's evil plan, while Eleven, who's still alive, is hiding in Jim Hopper's cabin as she tries to find out more about her past. Now, this season has things that are better than the first, and maybe a little bit worse. But actually, that kind of rhymes. I can't believe I said that. But good stuff is really good. I think the storyline with Will and his family was so well handled. This is definitely some of Noah Schnapp's best acting in the entire show. And to come from like just season 2 where he's still a kid, he just pulls you right into his scenes each and every time. And it even gets to the point that when you figure out like that there's some sort of spirit controlling him, you're not sure whether or not this is Will in his entirety or if this is the Mind Flayer taking control of his body. And it's Noah Schnapp's performance that really makes us question whether or not he is being possessed or if he's always been Will. Plus, the new characters of Max and Billy were very well done additions. Max may not be the most calm character, and she might not be the most nicest character, but she's still a well executed character, especially because we find out more about her backstory and how much possessive and abusive older brother Billy is. Which Billy, just like Steve, he's another character that goes through a major transformation, but here, Daygray Montgomery plays a douchebag really well. And speaking of Steve, the storyline with him and Dustin is so hilarious to watch. And when it gets to like the whole joke of, oh, it starts off one of the greatest comedic duos of all time, of Dustin and Steve, and we see them going off trying to find this demo dog that Dustin calls Dart, or D'Artagnan as he should say. And of course, let's talk about one of the biggest standout characters this season, Bob Newby. Everybody loves Bob Newby, man. He's such an adorable, such a kind-hearted and warm character that you just can't help but like ask, can I be your friend or something? But I love that he's not just like a throwaway character that's just ended up with Joyce out of nowhere, as he actually does play a good part in the story as he works his brain to figure out where all the connections to the Upside Down throughout Hawkins is coming from, and it leads to some amazing chemistry between Sean Astin and Winona Ryder. And I thought that was fantastic. The relationship between Eleven and Hopper is a great start to their father-daughter bond. And even though Hopper is like acting a little bit too aggressive towards Eleven, it comes from a place of love, especially when we found out that he lost his kid and he doesn't want to lose another one that feels like a daughter figure to him. And I think that David Harbour and Millie Bobby Brown had great chemistry, and I liked a lot of Eleven's story for the most part. Now, there are still some problems with this season that kind of derails it compared to the first one. Bob's death was really not that well written, okay? It was so obvious and so plot armory to get this character killed off that it's not even funny. Like, you have Bob that is given a gun by Jim, and he goes into his, like, heroic stage, which I like that he goes out as kind of a hero in this scene, you know, Bob Newby the superhero, but Bob forgets his gun and he's running from the Demogorgons and the Demodogs, and then all of a sudden he decides to just stand there instead of running from the Demodogs and then gets eaten alive by them. And Joyce doesn't try to go in and kick them, and nobody does too much to help him except Hopper shooting the Demodog with a gun, and he dies. He just straight up dies. And this is a problem with most of the show, is that they introduce characters that are killed off in the same season they're introduced. And for the most part, their deaths are at least well written, but the way that they had Bob go out was so obvious, and in my opinion, not his time to go. I feel like they could have used him for more, and I feel like he was slowly developing into a really interesting character, and then they killed him before he got even more great. I feel like they could have used him in season 3. In addition, the Lost Sister storyline with Carly. I love Eleven's story for the most part, with her finding out about her mother, but the Carly storyline, that was like one of the most pointless aspects of this entire show. And, you know, the episode itself, I actually thought it was okay, but it leads nowhere with the Carly character. It does sort of evaluate Eleven's story, but I kind of noticed that 11 has nothing to do with the main story of the season until the finale. And I feel like that a lot of 11's storyline could have added more to the main story. I also didn't really like how kind of a douche Mike was being to Max. I mean, just because he lost 11, I get it. And he has been going for a bit of a rough stage, especially now that he's turning into a teenager. But I feel like him excluding Max from the group just was way too out of line for him. Overall, I liked this season. I loved the season. The reunion between Mike and 11 was so satisfying, and I liked the way it concluded, but I did think the first season was better. But I still like this season, so I'll give it a 4.25 of a star out of 5. Now, we're halfway done doing our recap for the show, so let's move on to the third season of Stranger Things. This season is about 11 and her friends having their summertime at Starcourt Mall during the summer of 1985, until they discover that the Mind Flayer is back and has taken the vessel of Max's brother Billy. So now they have to try to figure out what Billy is up to. Meanwhile, it turns out that a gang of Russians, scientists and soldiers have found a way to open the gate, which is why the Mind Flayer is here. So Dustin leads his own group to find out where the Russians' base is, while Hopper and Joyce try to capture a Russian named Alexei to figure out how to stop the Russians from keeping the gate open. Now, I will admit, I don't think this season is as strong as the first two. It's a good season, I liked it. But to be honest, it does kind of miss a lot of things that I do like about the first few seasons. But let's get into the pros I liked. This is definitely the most colourful season out of the three, which really fits the fun summer nature that this season explores and is involved in. Plus, it does have some nice, lovely colours whenever we see characters going through the mall. However, this season definitely has a lot of characters that really stand out. I love the storyline with Dustin, Steve, Lucas's sister Erica, and a new character named Robin. Their storyline is definitely the strongest bits of humour of the entire show, and I absolutely love seeing them whenever they're on screen. Plus, I love the chemistry between Robin and Steve, with Robin having that amazing scene in the second to last episode where she comes out as a lesbian who likes girls and how she has trouble speaking to them, and Steve supporting it and trying to help her through it. I love that scene with Robin and I love their storyline. Hopper and Billy, in my opinion, are the biggest standouts this season. With Billy coming across as very layered as a character and having that amazing backstory, with him finally coming to own as being a protective person over 11 and his stepsister Max, which then leads to the emotional sacrifice of him at the end of the season. And Hopper, even though he is kind of a selfish person this season, he does have a lot of moments where he does act a bit aggressive towards characters. He's still fun to watch, and this is definitely the most action-packed season for Hopper out of the first three, especially whenever he fights the Russian Terminator guy, Grigory, I believe his name is, who came across as a menacing threat, who can choke people out with his bare hands. Plus, he and Hopper have one of the greatest hero-villain rivalries in this entire show, which then leads to the awesome throwdown between them at the end. And it also leads to Hopper's emotional sacrifice, which is explored in season 4, but the speech and letter that he sent for 11 at the end of the season was so emotionally touching. Now, the reasons why I feel like this season isn't as good as the first two is because of a couple of reasons. First of all, this season has definitely gone through a major tonal whiplash. You see, in the first two seasons, in my opinion, there was a very stronger mix of the comedy and drama and horror, and they combine those elements very well and they feel kind of balanced. Whereas this season, they seem to have taken the emotional moments that are still there, and there's still a good chunk of them, but they've increased the humour even more. I mean, I get that that fits the kind of summer comedic vibe that this season goes for, and I do kind of understand that, but for me it felt like a really major tonal whiplash compared to the first two seasons. to the point where there are at least 1 or 2 episodes where it's pretty much just full comedy and not really any time for emotional character development. In addition, I feel like there were some characters this season that weren't as properly utilised compared to the first 2. Like Joyce and Lucas, their scenes are great. I really liked Lucas this season. I didn't really have any problems with him. But the reason I didn't have any problems with him is because he didn't really have much of a character to have problems. It feels like he's just kind of there, and the season has definitely kind of turned him into more of a comic relief. And Joyce, because she doesn't have to worry too much about Will this season, she's kind of just being the side romantic interest for Hopper, as Hopper's storyline is basically him leading the season, and Joyce is just kind of there. Although I really love the bond between Murray and Alexei, which then lead to kind of a sad moment when Alexei dies, which I feel like that was a bit more better handled than Bob's death because he wasn't as big of a character, and I do like that his final moments is him just stepping out of the Russian scientist's traumatic life and just having fun at the fair. But yeah, I do agree that if Murray kept him in the car, he probably wouldn't have gotten killed. But in my opinion, the biggest problem I have with this season, and it's something that I kind of not changed my mind about after all these years, the melodramatic Mike, Eleven and Max storyline. For me, I do like the idea that Mike and Elle are together and they have some kind of dilemma between their relationship, but the way that they go about it was really not that well handled. And it all started with Hopper finding a way to like try to break them up, and we don't even get an apology scene with him and Eleven, where Eleven doesn't confront him about it. Yes, I will say that Mike did kind of handle Hopper's decisions kind of poorly, because Hopper was trying to talk about his feelings and Mike was kind of acting like a cocky boy in front of him, but I still feel like that Hopper should have also had some blame. I mean, both Hopper and Mike are to blame in this situation. And in my opinion, the motivation for Mike and Elle's breakup changes from time to time. At first, it starts off with Mike kind of telling a little fib to Eleven, but not being able to see her because of Hopper's decisions, and that's why there's some conflict there. But then it turns into something more like of a jealousy storyline as Max gets involved, and I'm sorry, Max this season was not giving the best advice in my opinion. She's only about like 14 or 13 around this time, so not everybody's gonna know the right advice, but I did not like the advice of, oh, he told you like a simple lie, nothing to say, oh, he treated you like garbage. Well, he treated you like garbage, so you're going to ignore him, and just ignore his calls until he fesses up. But if you want him to fess up, why are you telling her to ignore him? Like, it doesn't make any sense. I do like a lot of the scenes with Max and Eleven. I do love seeing their bond, but I feel like we could have seen them bond without having it being like this kind of split up like friendship love triangle. Plus, Eleven using her powers to spy on Mike even after she just broke up with him was not that well thought of an idea, and it is kind of like stalkerish kind of thing to do. Now yes, Mike and Lucas were in the wrong for saying that the girls were acting like they were from a different species. That was a wrong thing to say. But they wouldn't have known that if they didn't come up with the idea to spy on them, even though Eleven just broke up with him. But again, both Eleven and Mike are in the wrong. But the storyline seems to be caring more about Mike's behaviour, and he's the only one being a problem than Eleven's, when Eleven is also in the wrong, as well as Max. And I'm sorry, but in the second half of the season, Max was turning into a hypocrite, I'm sorry. When Mike saves Eleven's life from Billy, it seems like, oh, they can work on things on their own accords and solve their problems together. And then Max is like, oh, it's better than Mike talking blah 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 blah, and still like getting into Mike's face and saying, oh, I'm hanging out with Eleven, she's allowed her own things, when she should be letting him have some space. And when she says, oh, she's her own person, fully capable of making her own decisions, even though she herself is saying, oh, we need her to use her powers to defeat the Demogorgon or the Mind Flayer, and she's the only one that can do it, you know, we need her to do it. If she's her own person, why are you saying it's not good that she has help from her friends? I really don't like the scenes where they make Mike to look out to be the problem, where even though Mike has made mistakes through the season, he's not a bad person for saying that Elle, using her powers to look where Billy is or where the Mind Flayer is, could put herself in danger, and he's just looking out for her. Which proves to be that Mike was not a selfish character this entire season. Well, for the most part. I mean, the first episode or two, he was kind of eh. But for the rest of the season, he was not a bad person. And I didn't really buy this whole, oh, he's jealous of Max and Elle. Because really, Max and Elle aren't really doing anything to, like, support their bond when they're constantly getting into Mike's face. And everybody is not siding with Mike in this situation. And I don't like how it seems like, oh, if your ex is, like, spying on you and, you know, if they're kind of making fun of you on a few occasions, you should let them, you know. They're entitled to this behaviour. They're just girls being themselves, and you're a bad person if you tell them it's not good. Which can lead to some, like, relationships that could make people feel uncomfortable. In my opinion, I feel like that Max and Elle should have learnt their lesson. All of them should apologise to each other. And to be honest, Mike turns out to be right, because when Elle is using her powers, she ends up losing them, which ended up causing Billy to have to sacrifice his life to save Elle, and then Max has to watch her poor stepbrother die, which is a tragic scene, but it's just like, well, in a way, Mike was kind of right about, like, using her powers in these kinds of dangerous situations. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't like how this storyline was handled, and in my opinion, I feel like this storyline could have worked to the benefit if it was more used for drama, but they seem to have turned a lot of the storyline into more of a comic relief storyline. So they've been amped up for comedy, and it could have been used for drama, but instead they used it for laughs. And I didn't like how they made Mike look to be the bad guy, when in my opinion, Mike, Elle, and Max, all three of them are in the wrong, yet the season doesn't seem to be aware of it. But overall, I thought the season was good. I mean, a few problems were there, and it is my least favourite season, but I still thought it was really good, and it had an amazing season finale with the Battle for Starcourt. I love that episode. And I'm going to give this season a 4 out of 5. It's definitely worth the watch. And finally, we have the final season that has come out so far before this 5th season arrives, and that is the 4th season, which is about all of our characters being in separate situations, but being brought back together because a mysterious creature from the Upside Down, known as Vecna, is coming to terrorise the town. So now all the characters that we know and love have to try to stop him, while Joyce and Murray are off trying to rescue a surprisingly alive Jim Hopper, who is being kept in a Russian prison. I think that this is probably my favourite season of Stranger Things so far. I do think that season 1 did a better job at having, like, that kind of horror coming of age vibe to it, but this season definitely has a great ensemble and action centric, with seeing all of our characters in different spots. I especially love the storyline with Dustin and his group helping Eddie Munson, who is a really great character this season, trying to clear his name for Vecna's murders, as well as trying to figure out who Vecna is and how they can stop him. While Eleven is going through a familiar coming-of-age dramatic turn with bullies in her school and that epic moment where she beats Angela in the face with a roller skate, which honestly was very violent, but come think of it, she had it coming, okay? I don't buy that she didn't have it coming. Plus, the dilemma with Mike and Elle this season was much more well handled than season 3, because it's realistic and both Mike and Elle are in the wrong this time. Elle shouldn't have lied to Mike, but Mike should be more understanding about her own problems. So they both, you know, work in that way. Plus, we get the return of Dr. Brenner, who, honestly, I do wish they could have showed how he made it out alive at the end of season 1, but it was still great regardless. I will admit, it did kind of go on a bit too long with that storyline, but it was a great way to introduce Henry Creel, aka Subject 1 of the kids that were in Hawkins' lab. And it leads to, honestly, one of the greatest reveals of the entire show, where Henry, aka 1, is revealed to be Vecna, and Vecna is the one who shaped the Mind Flayer into what it is. So just about everything in the show up to this point has all been him. He's the one that has been pulling the strings. So it's like he's the big bad of this show, which I hope he turns out to be like that in season 5. But speaking of Vecna, he is one hell of a villain, and Jamie Campbell-Bower gave a fantastic performance, making him come off as creepy, making him come off as unnerving, and his facial expressions did work well to make his way through all that makeup. But I also loved his performance as Henry Creel, aka One, because even without all the makeup, he is so manipulative and creepy with his choice of words that it's honestly one of my favourite performances from a TV villain. I will admit that sometimes this season does go on a bit too long, and there are a lot of characters, and some didn't get as much spotlight, and I still don't like that Mike's mother is still not involved in a lot of this storyline. I think we have to wait till season 5 to get the answers to those questions. And I will admit that the Jason storyline did go on a bit too long, although I loved the fight with him and Lucas. And speaking of Lucas, like in terms of characters in Lucas's storyline, Max was a major standout this season. And it's definitely her season in a lot of areas. I think she's definitely one of the major central characters, maybe even more than Eleven. Because she has the best character development, she has the most emotional scenes, she has the very worriness, she has a lot of great chemistry with Lucas. I love that they grew Lucas and Max's bond more than season 3 and gave us back those kind of heartwarming moments in season 2, which then leads to the downfall where Vecna manages to get Max, and Max is like dying, and just seeing her eyes just being blank and bloody, and you know, she falls into Lucas's arms and saying, "I don't want to die," and you got Lucas that's crying. Like, Caleb McLaughlin, Sadie Sink and Millie Bobby Brown's performances in that scene were phenomenal. And the same goes for Eddie's death, which I think was a much better handled main character in just one season than Bob, because unlike the other times where Eddie would run away from danger, instead he ran towards the danger and stood up and didn't run away and fought and went out like a hero. That was so emotional, and him just like dying in Dustin's arms just made me feel sorry for him, which then led to Dustin telling Eddie's uncle what kind of hero Eddie was, and just definitely the best performances from Gaten Matarazzo in those scenes. And I also love Jim's storyline with him trying to get out of the prison, and it's definitely some of the most coolest action and character development that Jim Hopper has gone through throughout the entire show. Plus Murray using his karate skills was just a blast to watch. And it then leads to the final episode, The Piggyback. I think it might be my favourite episode of the show so far. It was intense, it was long, it was thrilling, it was emotional, and it ended it on a cliffhanger that made us so excited for the 3-year wait for this final season, with Vecna coming into Hawkins, getting ready to reign his terror, and we're going to get all-out war next season. I have kind of only touched the surface in terms of spoilers of what I loved about this season, although if you want to hear my full non-spoiler thoughts in more detail, feel free to check out my actual review of it, which will go into more details without any spoilers about my many things to love about this season. And I think that up until the last 3 episodes, I was divisive whether or not 1 or 4 was my favourite season. Then the last 3 episodes of 4 came and I was like, yep, 4 is definitely my favourite season. Although I am going to give it the same grade as season 1, a 4.5 out of 5. It's a heck of a season and you should check it out. So, ranking all the seasons, number 4 is 3, number 3 is 2, number 2 is 1, and number 1 is 4. Those are the seasons I have ranked. And some of the best characters this season: Jim Hopper, Eleven, Eddie Munson, Bob Newby, Billy Hargrove, and Steve Harrington, Dustin, just so many great characters. Vecna as well, great villain, and overall the show I still think is well held up. I do notice a few more problems this show than I did when I was younger, but I still think it's a masterful show with great characters, the performances are amazing, the comedy is hilarious, and I really cannot wait to see how the show is going to wrap up. It's going to be really sad, but I loved rewatching the show. So overall, the full show, I'll give it a 4.5 out of 5, which is like a 9 out of 10. And if you haven't seen Stranger Things yet, hurry up and watch the whole show if you want to before the final season comes out. But anyway guys, that was my revisit of Stranger Things. What do you think of this show? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And what's your favourite season, episode, character, or scene of the show? Let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, more videos to come. I really hope that guy is not going to stick around.
Obviously I will.
Yep, of course. And I'm Daniel, reviewing movies, TV shows, and doing videos. Till then, peace out, man.